Thank you everyone for joining us. I think we're going to have a good program for you today. My name is Alicia Sheehan, and myself, along with Judy Conway, are going to kind of lead this panel discussion. I have some canned questions, and then maybe at the end, if anyone has questions in the chat, I think there should be a chat. You can type any that you have, and then I'll go and look at that at the end. I'm an attorney with Heil Royster in the Springfield office, and Judy is with Cooney and Conway. She represents individuals with asbestos-related injuries, and she is the current chair of the Young Lawyers Division. I have previously served on the Board of Governors for the ISBA as well. With us today, we have President Anna Krelikowska, President Elect Rory Weiler, Second Vice President Shawn Kasserman, Third Vice President Sonni Williams, and Former President John Thies. Star-studded. I'm going to go through some bios really quick, so hopefully I can talk fast because we have, like I said, some very distinguished panelists today. Anna is the president of the ISBA and founder of her law practice, Anna P. Krelikowska, PC, where she practices in family law and mediation, and has served on the ISBA Board of Governors and the Assembly. She was chair of the General, Solo, and Small Firm Section Council. She's also the 5th female president of the ISBA. Rory is the incoming president of the ISBA and partner at Weiler and Langle, PC, focusing on cases involving parental allocation and more complex economic issues, especially those involving family and closely held businesses. Rory has served as the ISBA treasurer and has also served on the ISBA Board of Governors. He has been the chair of the ISBA Family Law Section Council and is also a member of the ISBA Legislation Committee. He also served 2 terms on the ISBA Assembly. Shawn Kasserman is the 2nd VP of the ISBA and co-founder of Tomasic, Coton, and Kasserman. Shawn has been a trial lawyer his entire career, exclusively representing victims of negligent and reckless conduct. He will serve as the president of the ISBA in 2023 and 2024. Shawn previously served on the ISBA Board of Governors. Sonni Williams was appointed as the, she is the 3rd vice president, and she was appointed as the city attorney for the city of Lockport, Illinois in June of 2017. Prior to her appointment, she worked for the city of Peoria for nearly 18 years. She was elected in May of 2021 as the ISBA 3rd vice president, becoming the first woman lawyer of color, as well as the first lawyer of the Asian Korean descent to be elected to that office. She'll be the ISBA president in 2024. Prior to that, Sonny served 2 terms on the ISBA Assembly and 2 terms as a Board of Governor and chaired a number of ISBA committees and section councils. John Thies is a practicing shareholder at Weber & Thies, PC in Urbana, where he concentrates his practice of in the areas of business representation and general litigation. John was the president of the ISBA in 2012 and 2013. And am I right about that? Okay, good. And he also served on the Board of Governors and the Assembly. And I will let John also fill in any more information on that later on. So let's get started. Sonny, I think, is going to have a short presentation on kind of the logistics of the different leadership positions at the ISBA. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Blake, thank you. So this is beyond the YLD. The participants here today, you want to know what's beyond the YLD. And I should have titled this ISBA Leadership Path or Paths, because we've taken multiple different various paths to leadership. So next slide. What is on the ISBA website is plethora of knowledge about ISBA governance. And, we all know that we hear about, the different, officers, but there's also the Board of Governors, there is the, Assembly, and oftentimes most ISBA members do not realize that it is the Assembly that is the supreme governing body of the association. So the budget, the legislative actions, all that needs approval by the Assembly. Next slide. So these are our current officers. You know, we have all 4 of us here, as Alicia introduced. And we're missing ex officio immediate past president, Dennis Orsi, but I didn't have enough, screen on my computer to take that snapshot. So screenshot. Next slide. Thank you. So the assembly is made up of 203 members. 178 members are made up of 88 from Cook and 88 from outside of Cook. And then the other, members of the assembly are the Board of Governors members, all the officers, and then the 23 governors. So that is how the assembly is made up of, and people don't realize that the 88, actually, next slide, so 88 elected from the judicial circuits outside of Cook, and then 88 are elected from Cook. So, and those 88 members from Cook, they actually have staggered elections. So this year, 44 seats are up for election. Next year, 44 seats for Cook members from Cook, ISB members from Cook will come up for election next year. So the term of an assembly member is for 3 years and no more than 2 consecutive full terms. So next slide. So, and one thing that Alicia asked me to talk about is like, how do you get on the assembly? That's one of the things that, we know that is sort of, for most members, they don't realize the policy and the procedure to get on the assembly. So the nomination of assembly has to be submitted with not less than 10 ISBA members eligible to vote from that appropriate geographic area. So if you're running for assembly position in Cook, then you need 10 members of the ISBA from Cook County. Now, if you are, running for an assembly position in the 12th Judicial Circuit, you need 10 from ISBA members from the 12th Judicial Circuit. So the for the Board of Governors, it's 50 members from that appropriate geographic area. And for the Board of Governors, there are different regions, area 4, where I used to serve on the Board of Governors, covered, the 10th Judicial Circuit, plus, other, I think it was the 11th and the 13th or 14th. And then the third vice president, you have to have the no less than 350 ISBA members, and that could be from the whole entire state. Any ISBA member throughout the whole state can, sign your nominating petition. Next slide. So as we know, we are in the middle of ISBA election season, and it goes from October 1st to April 30th. And the election results are announced no later than the 5th business day of May. So it's coming up. You'll probably be getting your ballots in April or end of March, and then you have the whole entire month of April to vote, and then the election results are announced no later than the 5th business day of May. Next slide. And so one of the things I want to address is that, what you do beyond the YLD. You served in the YLD, and you want to go beyond that. One of the things that, I've realized, my experience being on the ISBA for over since 1999. So there are oftentimes vacancies because there are not, candidates don't run, or, it becomes vacant. Whoever wins, there are very rare occasions where someone dies before getting the seat. So there are vacancies, and there will be vacancies in Cook County this year because we don't have enough, enough candidates nominating themselves and getting enough signatures for 44 spots. So there will be vacancies coming up, not only in Cook, but also other judicial circuits. Next slide. And this is one of the things that, I have to impress upon those who are new to the ISBA, or new lawyers, new ISBA members. So this is what happens, how you can get on the, to fill that vacancy. So when a vacancy occurs after the election, an ISBA member could submit a nominating petition with 10 signatures and then send it to the ISBA. If after getting that, the first candidate to submit to be appointed to the vacancy, then the executive director of the ISBA, Bob Craighead, has to send an email out to all the other ISBA members in that geographic area saying, hey, this person nominated themselves for this vacancy. Then what happens is that within 14 days, you can say, hey, I want to also, fill that vacancy, or I'm, interested in that vacancy. You do the same thing, submit the nominating petition, and then the Board of Governors decides who to fill. And oftentimes those are very contested election to fill the vacancy. But any of you out there who are in Cook County, I know there's going to be vacancies in that. So think, about this rule, and look at the website for that. And that's a little, sort of how to get on the assembly. And you don't necessarily have to get on the assembly right away, but I think each of us had a different path to ISBA leadership, and I look forward to hearing from all the other panel members here, and I will give the floor to Leisha.
Yeah, I'm wondering if anyone wants to speak to reasons why you wanted to join the assembly, or why someone else would want to join the assembly.
If you don't mind, Alicia, this is Anna. So before I answer your question to our participants today, please don't let our bios intimidate you. None of us ran for third VP as our first step into the ISBA. All of us had different paths. And for you, you're just trying to discover what makes sense now and what might make sense long-term. So please, please don't get discouraged, intimidated. We're lawyers just like you. As far as my path, so I come from a family of immigrants. I moved here as a teenager. There was no one in my family who was an attorney. My parents did not know any attorneys. And I became involved with the legal community through the Advocate Society. They were awarding scholarships for law students, and I applied and was awarded a scholarship. And someone I met there, Bob Oleszkiewicz, suggested that I become involved with the ISBA once I became an attorney. And I requested an appointment to YLD. And that was my first step into the ISBA. And I met amazing friends and mentors and colleagues who then encouraged me in my progression through the ISBA. So my next step after YLD was to run for the assembly. And it was because it was and is the governing body of the ISBA, but also I wanted to learn more about the ISBA and how it worked. And I wanted to have a greater impact. And it also didn't hurt that the assembly only meets twice a year. So the time commitment I was being asked to make wasn't too extensive at the time. So that's something to consider.
And I totally agree with Anna regarding, none of us are here because we ran for the third vice president, of the ISBA soon after, being on a section council. I took more the non-traditional way to where I am today. So when I joined the ISBA, and I was so interested and the reason why I became active was because then President Tim Birchie, who happens to be in Peoria, was talking to me, and he said, Sonny, one of the best things you could do is become active in the ISBA. And I was never a member of YLD. Surprisingly enough, I think a lot of the ISBA officers, they joined the YLD first and then kind of climbed up the ladder. I took the non-traditional way. I joined the ISBA, and I actually ran for the assembly, pretty quickly because I didn't know any better. I wanted to be involved, but I didn't realize that most, people on the assembly served on section councils and committees before they even thought of running on the assembly. So there's no set rule that says you can't run and be on the assembly and be an active member, and you have to go through different section councils or YLD. So I think we all have a very unique path. It's just, if you want to be active, talk to one of us on like what section councils you want to participate in or get appointed to, and also, take those vacancy opportunities.
Anybody else want to jump in on assembly?
Sure, I can say a few things. So,
Sure.
First of all, great to see so many young lawyers and others, including Judge Ed Shanebaum. I see you there, except you're not on. Oh, there you are. Okay, I know you're not in the YLD anymore. So I'm John Thies, and I was president in 2012. And my road to being ISBA president started in law school. And so I went law school to getting on a standing committee. I worked my way through that and became chair of that committee. I ran for the assembly, served in the assembly, then ran for the board. And then I was treasurer and secretary of the board, and I ran for third VP and won the one race I had. So that's what took me to being president ultimately. What I would suggest, though, just quickly to all of you is, as has been said, there are lots of different paths to ISBA leadership, but there are also lots of paths to trying to achieve the sorts of things that you want to achieve in the profession. And I always saw the ISBA really even at the very beginning in law school as being a platform that would allow me to do the things I wanted to do in the profession. And I always thought, maybe there are lots of wonderful bar associations that are out there. Many of you simultaneously are participating in those, but some only spend their time in those other associations, which is great. The key is what you do with the opportunities that you're given. So in my case, most of you weren't around when I was president, but I had certain agenda items that were very important to me that I worked on that year, and also progressed and did many more things within the American Bar Association, within the legal aid community. I was president of Land of Lincoln Legal Aid, which is about the southern 2/3 of the state, the legal aid organization, and some other things along the way too. But each of these just presented a new opportunity for me to try to accomplish what I thought was important in the profession. And I'll encourage all of you to do the same. And of course, there's nothing better than the ISBA. I think that it's really a meritocracy. I think you work your way up by demonstrating that you're committed to the mission of the association. And one thing I left out was the mutual. So Anna didn't say this, but so as Anna transitioned from the YLD into kind of the next level in the bar, two of us identified her coming out of the Young Lawyers Division and put her on a focus group, John Locallo and me. And we got to know Anna, and then we put her she was on a committee. I see Emily Mazalski's on too, and Emily, same thing happened with her. People start to see your leadership qualities, and they know that the association and its affiliates like the Mutual will benefit a lot from that. And at a certain point, it's just natural that you'll continue to work your way up and have more and more opportunities.
Thank you, John, and it's been a great experience.
So I'll kind of dovetail off of what John just said. I wanted to start with the reasons to get involved. The fact that you're on the call probably is an indication that you want to get involved, but make no mistake about it. I think all of the panelists would agree that it's being a member of the ISBA. We've had a stronger law practice because of it. We've had better careers. We've made lifelong friends. I mean, good lifelong friends that you couldn't be more thankful for. You have statewide support. It's really the manner in which it's benefited all of our lives is just almost indescribable. So how to get involved? One of the things I would say to you is when I tried to get involved as a very young lawyer, I ran for the Board of Governors and got crushed, just annihilated by a young man who worked for Leonard Amari. And Leonard Amari is a past president and kind of he's certainly politically connected. He called me and he said, don't take it personal. You're going to lose this one, but you'll have a real strong future in the ISBA if you want it. And I did want it because I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun. Everywhere I went, I was meeting interesting people that I could help, people that helped me. And the network that evolved was just so natural and so healthy and so beneficial. So, I think that what I would advise all of the younger lawyers or even more seasoned lawyers thinking about getting involved, just find what you love to do and go do it, but do it with people from the ISBA and help them and let them help you. And one day you'll wake up and you'll be an old guy who is about to be president of the ISBA, if that's what you want.
I'd like to follow up.
I'd like to follow up before you. I'm almost an 80-year-old young lawyer. And I remember when John Thies was a young lawyer and some of the other ones pictured here. But I do want to recommend all of you get involved in the ISBA in various committees and sections and enjoy your life. Thank you. That's all I needed to say.
Thank you, Judge.
The judge points out a very a good way to get involved. That certainly the assembly is kind of considered as the gateway to leadership. It's not terribly difficult to run, and it's certainly not terribly difficult to serve on, as Anna noted, with only 2 meetings a year. But I would also encourage everyone to consider section council and committee membership, because that's sort of the path that I took. I had not been involved with the ISBA hardly at all until I became a member of family law, and family law turned out to be just an amazing experience for me. I enjoyed it. It gave me the opportunity to participate in legislation. It gave me the opportunity to participate in CLE. It gave me the opportunity to become published as an author. So there are different paths. I would encourage you to consider section council and committee membership certainly as one of those paths, because it kind of went from family law to being the chair of family law, and then on to the Board of Governors, and you start seeing the same people and they start seeing you and they say, hey, can you help me out? I have a committee I need you to serve on. And that, kind of leads, once you become involved and people start seeing you around, they start thinking, how can I get this person more involved in some of the things that we're doing? And that is another way to become recognized as a leader in our association.
I'll jump in here. I kind of, everyone's touched on this a little bit. My experience was a little different. And I just kind of want to point out something from my personality. I'm shyer. And so there are opportunities within the ISBA that the races, aren't as contested. For example, well, not for example, but I just wanted to state, with the assembly, there are numerous positions, like for Cook County, for example. So the space is there for new members to participate. There's different avenues of how to get involved. And as kind of Anna pointed out, the time commitment is different for each. So I think that there's good opportunities, but with varying degrees of how much you can commit. And so to kind of parlay into what happens if there is someone here who's thinking, well, I'd really like to be involved, but I just don't know if I have the time. How do you work it in? You know, we've kind of touched on it, but you know, if anyone wants to expand on that.
Sure, absolutely. I think Rory started talking about that. Once you become involved, that can take many different shapes. And by that, I mean, if you're a writer and you want to expand your professional credentials, you can write articles for various section council newsletters, sometimes even more in-depth articles for the Illinois Bar Journal, but you can do that. If you're a blogger, we actually have available as one of our programs something where we would share or highlight blogs that are written by our members. So that's another possibility. You can become a speaker, whether that's for a YLD presentation or more substantive presentations like torts or family law. As long as you're involved, people who are already involved in the ISBA will welcome that, because we believe in the ISBA. We've seen how it has impacted our lives in positive ways. We've made lifelong good friends, and we want to share that with others. So if you're interested and you let us know or indicate that you are, I am certain that all of us would be welcoming of that contact.
And I would say on the time commitment, to Alicia's point or question rather, you can spend as much or as little time as you'd like, especially when you get into the section council and committee arenas. Many of these committees and councils meet only periodically. It's only the most I guess you could say intense, like civil procedure and family law and some of the others that meet on a monthly basis. And you know, it's not a huge commitment of time. But if you'd like, you can make it a huge commitment of time. And then, you know, the Board of Governors meets periodically, usually 5-6 times a year. So as you progress, you find yourself expending the time that because you want to. You want to put more time and effort into it. But certainly it's a very modest commitment from the assembly and from section councils and committees.
Yeah, and I could add to that, like now that we are able to participate via Zoom virtually, it is far easier for everyone throughout the state to participate, even if you're in Madison County or you're in, you know, Joliet, or you're, you know, like I'm here in Lockport. It's far easier now with everyone going virtually to participate. And the assembly meeting that meets only twice, they decide weighty issues, budget. And when you participate in those 2 meetings and you read your material in your packet and you speak up there regarding the positions that you advocate for, either, you know, because that's what your practice area is, or if that's your, you know, what you're passionate about, people take notice of that. And there are many, you know, leaders, ISB leaders who take note, as, you know, Shawn alluded to, and John and Rory and Anna, that, you know, they take notice that you want to be active and you get appointed. One thing I do want to address about is how to get on those section councils and committees. And I hear this oftentimes from a lot of members. I wanted to go and, you know, be appointed to the section council or committee, and I was not able to, or I wasn't appointed. What do you do about that? You could actually participate in those meetings without being an official member of that committee, but it shows that you want to participate. And the nominating period, self-nominating yourself for those appointments, they're done with already. I think February 1st was the deadline, but you need to nominate yourself. And if you don't get in the first time, go and, you know, talk with the chair and, you know, advocate for yourself that you want to be on the section council or committee, and just get to know the other members, because eventually they will take notice and you will get appointed. So don't give up.
Sonny, you briefly
The other
mentioned.
thing,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Alicia. No, what I was going to say is the water's great, but don't be afraid to just dip your toes. You know, test it out. The water's gonna be very enjoyable, so you don't have to jump in all at one time. But when you do, you're gonna like it. So you know, find something that's just kind of that you can dabble. Go to a section council meeting. One of the things that I would encourage everybody to do, and it will help you get to a greater comfort level, is find a mentor. You know, if you want to be in the civil practice degree, go find who's listed on the civil practice and look into who might be a good fit. Just ask around. I would guarantee you, looking at the panels, every one of us had many mentors who were instrumental in getting us not only through the threshold, but into the room, and then finding ways to really to thrive once we were in the room. So, and by the way, ISB members want to do that. They want you to call them up. They want you to ask them if you can have a cup of coffee. I always tell young lawyers, don't ask somebody to go to lunch because it's going to cost us $150 in an hour and a half. Ask if you can, you know, stop by the office and bring a cup of coffee to the office. You know, you can stick out in folks' minds by just being creative and assertive, but being yourself.
Great advice, Sean. If I can also point out that there's also opportunities to get involved with the Illinois Bar Foundation, of which Sean is a past president. So if you are the type of a person who likes organizing events, or maybe wants to help raise money for good causes that touch lawyers' lives and their families and people in your communities, that might be an opportunity to get involved as well.
Alicia, what I was going to add to this question of how do you find the time to do this? It's the toughest nut to crack for young lawyers, in my opinion, as they progress in their personal lives as well. It is, I think it's a reasonable thing to say that you get out what you put in, and sometimes, you know, the more time you have to commit to it, the better. But I know that's not always possible for everyone. But one thing to put in to your consideration is, where are you working? Are you in an environment where the people around you encourage participation in bar association work, and also community work for that matter? Employers that focus on the whole person, I think are the right places to work. I've had friends who've told me, you know, I get no credit in my firm for the work that I do in the bar. One person at a big firm once told me, so I write a lot of checks to great organizations because I can't participate in them. That's how I get involved, and I appreciate that. But I also find it sort of disappointing because I know what they're missing out on. So I think the practical tip is try to find employers who value this sort of involvement. In my firm, Weber and Thies, we make it a priority for every single one of us, not just the bar association, but also the community. You're not penalized for that. In fact, you're rewarded for it. We consider that to be something that shows that you're progressing in the right way as a lawyer. So keep an eye out for the kind of employers that will help you do these sorts of things.
Excellent points by John. If I can add to that, keep in mind that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, right? This is your lifelong profession, hopefully. And there are ebbs and flows in life. There might be moments where you're at a firm that does not really allow you to be more actively involved, but you might be able to write an article. You might be able to do those things that don't require intense, constant commitment. But things might change in a few years. You might be at a firm that actually values state bar involvement, or you might be creating your own firm and recognizing that there's a lot of value that you get from ISBA, that we give back in many ways as much as you give to us. So don't get discouraged if right now you're in a place in your life where you feel like you cannot commit to ISBA.
I also guarantee you that if you take the time to write an article, it'll get published. And we publish, Anna, you probably know this better than I, but 25, 30 monthly newsletters from all of our various and sundry section councils and committees. And after 20 years of attending family law section council meetings, I can honestly say there was never a single meeting where the editor of the newsletter didn't say, I need articles, send me articles. So that definitely, that's a way to test the waters. And again, you control the time that you put in on that. So write articles, we'll publish them for you.
So Sonny briefly mentioned that the assembly deals with the budget. Could you guys talk a little bit about substantively what the assembly versus the board of governors and even section councils and everything do? So what on those things may be of interest to people and why they would join them?
Can I jump in first on this one?
Please go ahead.
I'm the veteran here. So I love the assembly. Part of the reason the assembly is so good is it's the only body of its type in the state of Illinois. The Chicago Bar Association does not have this. No specialty bar or ethnic bar has this. It has the capacity, if used the right way, to speak powerfully, more so than the board. And it really is an important companion to the president. There have been movements over the years to get rid of the assembly or to scale it back to fewer members. And I've always opposed that because not only is it a great way for lots of people throughout the state to get involved at a more important level of the ISPA, but it's also a really good tool for the president to use in carrying out an agenda. If you go to the Supreme Court with a particular initiative and you're able to talk about what the assembly did on the topic, and by the way, frequently we have justices of the Supreme Court that are sitting there watching what we do in our assembly. It's more persuasive to the court when they know that our assembly has acted on something. I used it at both assembly meetings when I was president. I used them. I got initiatives through that I cared about and was able to work off of those actions to make further progress on my agenda. So I think that's another thing. That this is a bit of a soapbox talk because some of you are going to be decision makers someday. And I hope you remember comments about why the assembly is such an important part of what the ISPA does.
And to John's point regarding the time period in which the ISPA Board of Governors was looking into reducing the assembly, that was to address the lack of participation by the assembly members. And I think it's because the ISPA members have this perception that the Board of Governors runs the ISPA, but by the bylaws, it is the other way around. The assembly is the supreme governing body of the ISPA. And that's because you're representing the constituents in your areas, the Cook County or 12th Judicial Circuit, but that is where the policies are passed by the assembly. But we need active members on the assembly. We need active members like everyone in this meeting to participate and go to the meeting, read the packet, and actively advocate for your client or your position. Because without that active participation, we may be looking at reducing the assembly again. When I talked about those vacancies in the assembly because no one submitted their nominating petitions, even though the Board of Governors has the ability to appoint those vacancies, it may not happen. They're not required to. So oftentimes the assembly vacancies aren't filled by the Board of Governors. So, if you're thinking of running and being active in the assembly, get those nominating petitions out there, get those signatures, and end up putting yourself out there to either win or fill the vacancy. So again, you have to watch for those ISBA notices when the vacancies are announced, because I want every one of them to be filled, because the Board of Governors takes a lot of time in trying to figure out who should fill those positions. But if we have active YLD members out there, going and wanting and showing their interest, you have the opportunity to fill those vacancies.
So Judy, your question is such a great one. And I want to step back a little bit so we all get the big picture. The assembly, for those of you that are kind of catching up to us, the assembly is a 203 member group of people that meet twice a year, and they vote on ISBA policy, procedures, all kinds of different things. And one of the more moving, more prouder moments I had was after the George Floyd murder, when it was shortly after that. Some true leaders, not the president, not board members, people on the assembly got together and helped us get to the right spot and the right response to that horrible situation. It was true leadership from the ground up. And anybody on this call could be on the assembly and helping to have that energy expanded through your efforts. So it really is. And I don't know of any other state bar that has an assembly that is as active as ours is. It's a wonderful opportunity to get in and start making a difference in the lives of a lot of folks.
I'm going to jump in really quick. Shawn, you had a great point, and I like that you had, like, to Judy's question, like a specific thing that the assembly has done. Is there any more that you can think of something, that you remember that the assembly has done? And then maybe we can kind of transition and say, what does the Board of Governors do? Some subjects that they've touched on recently.
If the question is directed at me, the other thing that really sticks out in my mind, the assembly stood up and said no, was a meeting, God, I can't even, 5-6 years ago, where some representatives from Washington State came in and started pushing an agenda for the
legal technician, legal tech.
It essentially allowed non-lawyers to do legal work. And again, as a lawyer, I was never so proud to watch the line of assembly members get up and stand at a microphone with the ability and the guts to speak to why that was wrong. And I think from that date going forward, Illinois we're kind of in a leadership role of fighting against the unauthorized practice of law. The law should be something that's handled by lawyers and not law clerks or legal assistants for a reason. And I'm not demeaning anybody's position, but what we do is so important. And so, I don't know, I'll let the other panel members tell you what stuck out, but those two things I watched happen live, or one of them was via Zoom, but there's a real sense of pride that forms when you see this work in action.
Well, I'll give you a couple. I mean, there are many examples of this. Another one is the death penalty. We had a fabulous debate in the assembly over the death penalty, and the association took the position that the death penalty should be abolished. That was a proud moment. I would have said the same thing Shawn did about triple LTs. A great example. In my year, I had an initiative for law student debt. The law student debt issue, you're all very familiar with that, being young lawyers. Well, in 2012, this was not something that was on everybody's radar, but we were hearing from young lawyers. In fact, the chair of the Young Lawyers Division and I talked before my year began to tell me what it meant to her. And so we had a fabulous initiative, a great task force that had hearings all over the state. It resulted in a report. That report, we had a preliminary report mid-year, and we had a final report at the end of the year. And that, I believe, was the preeminent law student debt report in the nation. And it got approved by our assembly, and it resulted in lots of fanfare, national articles about it, and it's the assembly. So there are others too that we could give, but suffice it to say that we don't want to get rid of that opportunity to amplify things that comes from having an assembly.
Yeah, I remember when we debated about civil union, about whether or not the ISBA should even take a position on that, because people consider it to be a social issue and not a legal issue. And I remember Ava George Sturt went up there and eloquently talked about how, you know, if the ISBA didn't take positions about, you know, interracial marriage, she and her husband would have never been able to get married. And so when she went up there, and I think it was her first year on the assembly, I'm like, okay, I got to take a beeline over there and talk to her and get her more active in the ISBA. But that's what was very memorable about the ISBA. We can debate, we can have different position, but in the end, the assembly members were the ones who voted for either opposing, you know, some legislative action or, you know, supporting it. So the assembly is a very powerful body of you know, governing body of the ISBA, and we tend to forget that because everyone talks about the board of governors or the third VP, but you know, we need active members on the assembly, and I'm harping on that over and over again. But that is what drives the ISBA.
Let me dovetail one more thing because of what Sonny said. So she talked about how one of the problems is in the past, sometimes we haven't had attendance. Well, we always had attendance when we had important issues before the assembly. So, and I've always suggested to whoever the current crop of leaders is, that it's the president's responsibility. We have an agenda, an assembly agenda committee as well, but you can't depend on that. It's the president's responsibility to make sure that there are important things before the assembly. As long as we have those, we don't really have significant attendance problems.
Let me, I want to touch upon before we're done. It's been so helpful to talk about the assembly. I think that's where a lot of people, I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to get involved. I think it will, if you know, there is more participation, I think it will make the assembly more fruitful, as everyone's kind of described and John just hit on. In case there's people who are watching this or will later, you know, watch, who are ready for Board of Governors, that's the goal that they're heading toward. You know, specifics to the board or advice. I could come up with 5 questions, but let me just give a tiny rundown of you know, the Board of Governors, at least from my view, my time there. Information's gathered, they hear it, speakers come, and Board of Governors are listening to, you know, action items, and then they're voted on. Okay, so that's like the nuts and the bolts. So whoever wants to kind of jump in and touch upon the Board of Governors.
I think because the assembly meets only twice, the Board of Governors, they address like immediate issues. Like when we had that attack of attorneys being charged with, you know, being an appraiser without, doing an appraisal report without a license, they were actually charged by the Department of Professional Regulations. The Board of Governors voted to advocate and defend those attorneys because it was an attack on the profession. So that needed immediate attention, and therefore the Board of Governors was able to do that because assembly only meets twice. So it was one of those things where, you know, I harped on the assembly being the you know, governing leading the ISBA, but the Board of Governors, we meet more frequently. So we deal with more policies on what should be on the agenda. But John is right about, like, we are the ones who navigate and kind of, you know, propel that agenda. And if we have oftentimes issues that are not, you know, doesn't get assembly members excited, they're not going to participate. So, you know, there should be more substantive, more meaty issues on the assembly. And yes, we're going to have, you know, we may have a debate, and it could be the amendment to Rule 8.4 that is going to garner some opposition, but that is going to get the assembly members active. But that's my, you know, take on the Board of Governors. We meet more often. We can take immediate, actions on issues like that.
I think if I had to put it simply, the assembly is responsible for policy in the fashion that a body that only meets twice a year can be pensive about policy. The Board of Governors, on the other hand, apart from implementing policy, is more charged, not so much with the day-to-day affairs, that's where staff comes in, but with the mechanics of the operation of the association. One of the things we're considering right now is a request from the Bar Foundation to amend their bylaws. We're going to be considering, and of course, the budget goes first to the board before it goes to the assembly, but it's more of a nuts and bolts approach to the operation of the association than the assembly takes. I think that's probably as good a way of distinguishing the two roles as any.
Thank you, Rory.
I will make one other comment about the board, because when I went from being on a standing committee to going on the board, it was a rather significant step up in terms of the material that you needed to be responsible for. And the board members that I served with were, for the most part, very conscientious and very careful about understanding what the issues were before the board. And so we had wonderful meetings that went through those things and made, it's of course true that they're able to meet more frequently and so deal with things kind of on the fly at more of a mechanical level than the assembly is. But there are lots of examples. We talked about the mutual before. So the mutual happened because we had a problem for those of you that don't know this. So professional liability insurance was a real issue back in the mid 80s. The for-profit carriers were gouging our members, and the president at the time, coincidentally, my father, Dick Thies, created a committee in 1986, which chaired by Tom Clancy, great friend of several of ours, that dug deep into this issue of why the commercial companies were charging so much to our members, and they had no good reason for it. And so one thing led to another, and throughout the course of his year, it led to the assembly ultimately supporting the idea that we would create a company, which is now the ISB Mutual Insurance Company. And there have been lots of fabulous leaders that have worked their way through that to make it as successful as it is today. But it's an example of how you had leadership that begins with the ultimate leader, the association, the board, then the assembly, and then a new company, and then leaders that did some enormous good for the membership.
Similar to what John was saying about the mutual company, the IBF was also created by ISBA. So there have been a lot of good things that Illinois lawyers who were part of the ISBA have done for Illinois lawyers and our communities. Just one quick point in terms of the board, though. So similar to the assembly, there are specific geographic areas where there are board seats available. And this might be of particular interest to all of you, there are 4 board seats set aside for attorneys under 37 years of age, 2 in Cook County and 2 outside of Cook County. So if you choose to run for those seats, you are in essence competing, assuming you're in a contested election, against someone who's a young lawyer as well. And we thought it was important to have that input from young attorneys. And it also gives you a more level playing field if you're competing against someone who's of similar age and experience.
So John made me think of something too. We spent an hour here telling you why you need the ISBA, and we all firmly believe that. But I think it's equally true that the ISBA needs you. We need the next generation of lawyers to step up with an energy that cares for and protects the practice of law and society as lawyers. So, I don't want anybody to get the message that we're here to tell you that we're good for you. You also are good for us, and we need your participation in the ISBA. And the ISBA has been around since, I think, 1893. John, you weren't around. It's a long time. And hopefully it's a long-
1877.
Hopefully it's a long for at least that long going into the future. But we need young lawyers, new lawyers, energetic lawyers, creative ideas, diversity. It's all important to the success of the ISBA, and we really want to encourage you to fill that role.
Thank you, Shawn. So true.
I think it's a good stopping point, unless anyone else has any other points they'd like to make. I really appreciate everyone's time today, taking out of your busy schedules. I thought it was particularly impactful, so thank you.
It was our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yes,
Thank
thanks
you so
everybody.
much, guys.
If we're finished, you need a motion to adjourn?